esteemed advisory group member and supporting member of Asia CCUS Network. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning for those participate from Asia and good evening for those who participate from the US. And a warm welcome to the second Asia CCUS Network Knowledge Sharing Conference, organized by Asia CCUS Network in partnership with the US Department of Energy. I am Mr. Han Puman, Senior Energy Economist of ERIA, and I am your MC of today's conference. Briefly, Asia CCUS Network organized a series of knowledge sharing conferences to bridge the knowledge gap on the CCUS by sharing the experience from other parts of the region on the development and deployment of CCUS. As United States of America has been advancing in many fields in the clean technologies development, including the CCUS, today's conference will provide stakeholders in Asia an opportunity to update information on the development on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And in terms of the project development, regulatory framework, and other policy environment under President Biden administration to support the goal of net carbon emission and carbon neutrality by 2050. To start with today's conference, I am very honored to have Mr. Taiso Hara, Director General of Research and Policy Design Administration of ERIA, for the opening remark. Hara-san, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pumin-san, for your kind introduction. Hello, good morning, good evening, everyone, supporting members of Asia CCUS Network, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am Taiso Hara, the Director General for Research and Policy Design Administration of ERIA. Today, I am very pleased to have this opportunity to provide my opening remarks at the second Asia CCUS Network Knowledge Sharing Conference. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate the recent establishment of Asia CCUS Network, which was officially launched on 22nd June 2021 by Professor Hidetoshi Nishimura, President of ERIA, and jointly with Mr. Hiroshi Kajiyama, Minister of METI. Furthermore, at the launching event, honorable ministers from Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, and the United States provided the warm congratulation remarks for the establishment of Asia CCUS Network, and they also sent a strong supporting message to the leadership of METI and ERIA for setting up the Asia CCUS Network Forum, which aims to serve as a platform for cooperation and collaboration on low-emission technology partnerships that will eventually accelerate the development of CCUS. Today is the second Asia CCUS Network Knowledge Sharing Conference, and I am grateful to have a speaker, Mr. Daniel Jarrard, Director, Strategic Planning, Analysis and Engagement, Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, USDOE, to share his knowledge and experience on US policy development and its support to CCUS at various levels, the overall CCUS project, United States, and their international policy engagement in support of the CCUS deployment. I am also grateful for Mr. Jesus Taman, Director, Energy Policy and Planning Bureau, DOE Philippines, who will provide valuable comments and views. Taking this opportunity, I am very pleased to reiterate that the vision of Asia CCUS Network aims to contribute to the decarbonization of emissions in Asia through collaboration and cooperation on development and deployment of CCUS. Today, conference is one activity to contribute to the mission of the network and bridge the knowledge gap on CCUS in Asia. I am also delighted that this webinar knowledge sharing conference on CCUS is timely for stakeholders in ASEAN and East Asia to gather the most up-to-date information and required policy that can be applied to Asia to support the development of CCUS, learning from the US. I will not take much time on this. However, I just want to say thank you for your kind participation and contribution to this conference. I hope we all will find this conference very useful. Further, I strongly encourage for your active participation and discussion on this issue. Lastly, I wish the conference a successful and fruitful outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hara-san, for your very insightful opening remark, and for today's conference. And next, I'm also very honored to have Director Jared Daniel, the Director of Office of Strategic Planning, Analysis, and Engagement Office of Clean Coal and Carbon Management, Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, the U.S. Department of Energy, to have a opening remark. The floor is yours, Jared, please.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to share time with you all today. I'd also like to add my congratulations and support for Japan's leadership in ERIA standing up the Asia CCUS network. I think this is an extremely important mechanism to have these types of conversations, to determine how we can all coordinate and work together to advance CCUS, both the technology and the commercial deployment. Extremely important, and I think the addition to that global effort that the U.S. Department of Energy is so much a part of, now that the Asia CCUS network has joined, I think this will be very instrumental in reaching to many of the countries in the Asia Pacific region. On behalf of DOE, we look forward to supporting this effort in any way that we can, whether it's knowledge transfer through webinars like I'm providing today, whether it's in active collaboration as that progresses in a number of countries or bilaterally. Again, we welcome the addition of the Asia CCUS network to the broader global CCUS community. There are many mechanisms that we can all work on together to collaborate and coordinate our efforts to advance CCUS. And this one certainly looks to be very effective and efficient, reaching the membership and the colleagues in the audience today. So with that as opening remarks, again, we look forward to the conversation today as just one small step in our overall effort to coordinate and work with you all moving forward. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Director Jared, for very insightful opening remark along Harasan. I think this is set for today already discussion toward the presentation. But now we will have deep dive into the U.S. experience on the development of CCUS. So in this session, once again, we will have Director Jared Daniel as our speaker. After the presentation, Director Jesus Tamang, Director in charge of Energy Policy and Planning Bureau, DOE of Philippines, will have some comment on the overall CCUS and achievement after Jared's presentation. Then we will have open discussion where participants can drop their question in the chat box to the speaker directly. To start with, let me invite Director Jared again for the deep dive into the presentation on the U.S. overall CCUS development situation in the U.S. Director, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. And if you can confirm, can you see my slides?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for inviting me and representing the United States Department of Energy to share time with you to give you an overview of carbon capture, utilization, and storage in the United States. I hope to take the next half hour or 40 minutes and give you a very high-level view of the technology that we are advancing, the policy landscape in the United States, some of the very exciting project development going on in the United States. And again, hopefully that sets the scene for a very healthy and robust conversation after my presentation. I think the question and the answers in our discussion is the most interesting part of webinars like this. Again, we're here to share knowledge and find opportunity to collaborate. So please ask any questions and engage in the conversation. In terms of just setting the scene in the United States, I think all of you are aware that the Biden administration is very focused on addressing climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation. You can see some quotes from President Biden here in terms of, that his administration will take many, many steps toward achieving the goal of 100% carbon pollution free in the electric sector and the stationary power sector by 2035, and across our economy by the year 2050 to reach net zero target. He really wants to take a whole of government approach, not just the Department of Energy in the energy lane, not just our Treasury in our Treasury lane, but really to bring all the mechanisms of our federal government together to actively address climate change as much as we can. This is part of our domestic program in terms of within the United States borders, and it is very much also a part of our international strategy as well to work with like-minded countries to advance climate change mitigation globally, since it is a global concern and a global issue. You can also see some quotes here from the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, where basically, it agrees with all the math, and I believe you've heard recently this week from my colleague Samantha McCullough at the International Energy Agency. Most of the leading math and analysis out there states that we just simply can't get to net zero without technologies like carbon capture, utilization, and storage being part of that overall tool set or solution set. It's just mathematically impossible. And CCUS actually enables the lowest cost solution for all of us to achieve those net zero targets in the mid-century working together. So again, CCUS is an absolutely critical part in overall climate change strategy. And this is very consistent and explicit in the Biden administration's approach to addressing climate change broadly. In terms of climate priorities, I think you've already seen action from the Biden administration in terms of reestablishing United States leadership on a global scale. Again, the climate crisis and addressing it will be central to our foreign policy and our national security and our domestic actions as well at the federal level. The president has stated intent to rejoin Paris agreement very, very early on. He held a leaders climate summit earlier this year to raise climate ambition and to work with countries to aggressively drive forward in as many ways as we can to address our climate priorities. And again, working together with mechanisms that are most effective and efficient. As I mentioned earlier, we really want to take a government-wide approach to the climate crisis. He's standing up a national climate task force, and again, seeing what mechanisms and tools the federal government has broadly to all work together to address the climate concern. We want to build a 100% clean energy economy, reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Again, there's a near-term focus in the stationary power sector to have that be pollution-free no later than 2035. And that's not that much time from now, only a little more than a decade away. So a lot of technology is going to be required to be deployed to meet those aggressive goals. We also know that none of this can be done without adequate climate financing. And so the Biden administration wants to drive a conversation and a plan of how we as the United States as a nation will finance these ambitious goals and targets toward our climate priorities. Part of this is modernizing our infrastructure towards a sustainable economy, right? How do we green the federal government through what the federal government procures for all our federal installations? How can that lead commercial development and deployment in our private sector? We want to ensure that the federal government leads the way with as many mechanisms as we can through our purchasing power, through setting standards and other mechanisms that can, again, enable more rapid development and deployment in a global sense and in a public-private sense, right? Government can only do so much, but government and the private sector, government and industry working together can do much, much more. And that's an approach that the Biden administration wants to take, is to find those mechanisms and actively pursue them. And as part of this, we want to make sure that everybody in our nation is benefited by this approach to addressing climate change mitigation. And so really empowering workers in disadvantaged communities, in these marginalized communities that may have had a historic fossil energy plant, providing good jobs and good tax base for their schools and their local infrastructure, making sure that they're part of this new, more sustainable, lower carbon economy moving forward is also a key priority of President Biden and the administration. I think many of you hopefully took advantage of the first Asia CCS Knowledge Network webinar a couple of days ago, where my good friend and colleague Samantha McCullough from the IEA CCUS unit gave an overview of the work at the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and some of their analysis and reports in terms of deploying CCUS in the Asia Pacific region in specific. I think there are high-level messages that were put out in this report you see from last year sort of help frame our conversation on CCUS. It's a key pillar that needs to be in place to put the world globally on a path to net zero emission, right? The math says that reaching net zero will virtually be impossible without a healthy amount of CCUS as part of that solution set. We firmly agree that, and again, this really guides the investment portfolio and our policy landscape in the United States along those lines, that it takes all of these climate solutions together, and CCUS deployment is a robust part of that. It tackles emissions from the power sector, stationary power and coal and gas-fired power generation, but also, existing infrastructure and heavy industries like cement and steel, and refining, that you can't simply get to net zero without carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There's no other technology option if you want to fully decarbonize those industrial sectors that our economies will continue to rely on. It's also a pathway to low carbon hydrogen at scale, so-called blue hydrogen, right? And how we can develop that at scale early on in this coming decade to accelerate development and deployment of infrastructure that's required for, green hydrogen to really blossom and grow to a larger part of the solution as those technologies improve and those costs mature, and we can have more, fully decarbonized hydrogen at scale. CCUS enables that critical pathway as well. And really, all of this means that the mid-century targets require a significant scale up of CCUS from where we are today. I think if you look at the IEA analysis, again, this is from their energy technology perspectives, and hopefully many of you have already seen this and heard about this recently. But again, as much energy efficiency as we can do as society across the board, that probably gets you, about a third of what we need to do in terms of carbon emission mitigation or reduction between now and mid-century targets, right? To make our end use as efficient as possible, to make our energy generation and transmission as efficient as possible. But even after we dial in as much efficiency as a society as we can, we still need to further decarbonize, and that's really where CCUS comes in. And so the analysis varies, year to year, but you can see the bottom wedge here on this diagram shows the latest IEA analysis of the amount that CCUS needs to contribute, and it is material and it is large. And again, this helps frame our conversation on what we're doing to progress CCS in the United States. In terms of the Biden administration priorities for CCUS development and deployment in the U.S., DOE is going to be essential for achieving our climate targets and ambitions, right? So it's going to be essential to push the frontiers of science and engineering to advance the technology as much as we can, to increase the efficiency of carbon capture, and to drive down the costs of all of these carbon mitigation technologies. There's a current interest by the Biden administration, not just on sort of the historic way we talk about carbon capture, utilization, and storage from concentrated point sources like power plants or steel mills, but also to advance and lean into carbon dioxide removal, expanding carbon dioxide removal technologies such as direct air capture or bioenergy with CCS or BECCS. These technologies that can actually get you net negative emission reduction if you draw the box appropriately, and help offset other hard to abate sectors such as aviation, where there aren't a lot of good low carbon or neutral technologies available at the moment or the foreseeable future. We also, want to advance our R&D. We want to find new technologies and really drive those, accelerate those technologies, getting from an idea to a benchtop to a pilot scale to commercial deployment scale as rapidly as possible. We want to enhance our tax incentives that I'll talk about in terms of accelerating commercial opportunities and business models that work for CCS deployment in the United States. To help achieve our aggressive goal to fully decarbonize stationary power by 2035, we want to accelerate retrofitting CCS to existing power plants, those that will remain in service for years and decades to come. CCS can help decarbonize those installations and drive down the overall carbon footprint. And then again, applying CCS to these hard to abate industrial sectors, CCS has a crucial role to play if all the analysis is correct, and we believe that it is. We have much support in the United States from our Congress to work on these goals and achieve these goals working together. Strong support from both Republicans and Democrats in our two-party, political system that we have in the United States. Our Congress spoke with words and actions at the end of last year. The Consolidated Appropriation Act gives funding. It sets out funding and programs and reports back to Congress on all of the CCUS technologies to help inform Congress on the technology opportunities and the funds required for the government to step up and show leadership to develop and drive those technologies, and on opportunities to actually look at other technologies that integrate with CCUS, whether it's blue hydrogen, whether it's CO2 utilization technologies that we haven't really looked at in depth before. There's very, very strong support from our Congress to work on CCUS and carbon dioxide removal. One of the main tools, policy tools we have in the United States that some of you may have heard about are tax credits from our Internal Revenue Service. They're named Section 45Q after the section of our tax code. But these tax benefits have been on the books. They've been in place since about 2008, but at lower figures of merit. Originally, when they were constructed, it would provide $10 per ton of CO2 that was captured and used for enhanced oil recovery, and $20 per ton of CO2 that was captured and stored geologically for the sake of climate change mitigation. And we found that absent a price on carbon and other policy mechanisms, given the business landscape in the United States, wasn't enough to really drive CCS deployment as much as originally intended. And so in 2018, our Congress, realizing that, acted to increase the credit for these 45Q tax provisions to $50 per ton for saline reservoir storage for the sake of climate change mitigation, and $35 per ton if the CO2 was used for enhanced hydrocarbon recovery. They also expanded qualified uses, and given some slowness in Congress and by the government to do our part to get rules driven out quickly, and given some concerns about a slowdown in our overall economy due to the current pandemic, Congress recently approved a 2-year extension of these credits. And so now construction must begin by January 1st of 2026 to take advantage of these credits. But again, this is a federal policy tool that can very much incentivize projects to stand up. And we believe that these figures of merit, $35 and $50 per ton, may be effective in progressing some projects. In fact, as you'll see on the bottom of the slide, there are on the order of 36, almost 40 projects that are in various stages of planning that are being pursued on a commercial basis, in part inspired and supported by these 45Q tax policy provisions, and also state level policies and provisions, such as one that's talked about frequently, California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, which gives policy support to low carbon fuels, and CCUS can take part in that policy mechanism. And so, one of my overall comments to the audience today is that as you look to set a policy landscape that is supportive of CCS, you can think about doing that at a national scale and at a subnational scale, and talking about how those national and subnational policy tools can work together to enable CCS business models to be successful. In terms of state policies and incentives, here's just some ideas that you may want to consider. Financial assistance for specific projects, maybe financial assistance at a local or state level for pipelines and infrastructure development. Very, very key to enabling projects to get financial hurdle and to close and find investment, right? We need to capture the CO2, you need to transport it to where you're going to store it or use it, and then you need the storage aspect. And all of those aspects need to be integrated together in a way that the business model works across that entire value chain. And so financial assistance at a state level in the United States is something of great interest. Offtake agreements where people can guarantee the electricity if it's an electrical power plant with CCS on it, or output from a CCS project, again, to provide surety to a financial model and allow absolutely critical. Utility cost recovery mechanisms. If there's vertically integrated or large, utilities that are owned by municipalities or, a large set of the population, providing cost recovery at an appropriate rate of return to allow financing for CCS projects. Again, another mechanism that might be successful in your country. Putting CCS in low carbon portfolio standards. Many of our United States have portfolio standards for electricity production that require a certain amount of their electricity be generated by low carbon sources by a certain year in time, and making sure that CCS is available to take advantage of those and get credit for the low carbon footprint is a good policy tool that one could think about. When you talk about CCS and storing CO2 in the subsurface for very, very long times, geologic timescales, and again, the longer it stays there, the more permanent it becomes and it solidifies and decarbonates. Finding ways for the states and governments at a national level or a subnational level to help de-risk project financing by taking long-term liability for that sequestered CO2 may also be a policy support mechanism that's worth discussing if that's appropriate for your country or your situation. And finally, having CCS supported by low carbon fuel standards in motor transportation fuels, having this and doing the life cycle analysis that says what amount of credit should CCS produced enhanced oil recovery or other mechanisms that produce motor vehicle fuels, if those are mechanisms that can help support deploying carbon capture, utilization, and storage, that's a policy tool and incentive that we can talk about as well, that there is interest in examples in the United States. We also need, of course, strong and durable environmental regulations to support carbon capture and storage. Our United States Environmental Protection Agency, a parallel agency to where I sit at Department of Energy, finalized regulations specific to geologic storage for CO2 in December of 2010. Those have been on the books for over a decade. And again, finalizing and driving for regulations at a national level, something that's incredibly important and often becomes, the rate limiting step in developing countries or countries that are just looking to accelerate CCS deployment. And so this is an area that we all need to work on together to share lessons learned and to really enable strong, durable, transparent regulations for CO2 storage that everybody, industry can plan on and regulators can work with to provide that surety. Very, very important. And we have that very, very surely done in a durable fashion in the United States. In terms of DOE, our role in this is to advance the technology. We have on the order of $200 million US per annum provided to us to drive an R&D program, both on carbon capture and storage, and in recent years on carbon utilization too. A lot of the funds are spent on carbon capture because that's where a lot of the cost center is and the expense for CCUS across the integrated value chain. But we also progress our understanding of CO2 storage, transport, fate, and storage of CO2 in the subsurface. And I'll have some slides that give you an idea of our robust R&D program. As far as I know, the U.S. Department of Energy R&D program is one of the largest and strongest in the world. We've been doing this for over 2 decades now. And we have many lessons learned and good experience that we very much like to share, and we look forward to working with all of you bilaterally, multilaterally through many mechanisms to work together as best we can to advance the R&D and share our knowledge and lessons learned. In terms of our carbon capture program, historically we started on technologies that could capture CO2 from power plants, existing power plants, coal plants, and gas plants. You can see on the top of these pictures that's the percent of CO2 in the flue gas stream or in the working fluid stream from a chemical engineering perspective. It will always be cheaper and more efficient to capture CO2 from a higher concentration stream that contains more CO2 than a dilute stream. And so from a cost perspective or from an energy penalty perspective, targeting high concentration streams of CO2 is an extremely important part of an overall strategy to mitigate climate change concerns and have CCUS play an important role. In the power sector, we've been focused for many years driving advanced technology for coal plants and gas plants in a variety of configurations. As I mentioned, the Biden administration is very interested in expanding this to also include carbon dioxide removal. So then you talk about technologies such as direct air capture, pulling CO2 out of the air at 400 part per million, a different technology approach. But again, if we need to have carbon dioxide removal at some point, then we need to make sure that we progress those technologies and drive up the performance and drive down the costs by doing the R&D now. And so that is a large and growing part of our portfolio of capture. And you can also see we want to really focus on providing capture technologies for these hard to abate carbon intensive industries as well, such as ethanol plants, steel plants, cement plants. There's a variety of technologies that can enable carbon capture, solvents and sorbents and membranes. Many of the engineers in the audience will know these well. Trying to optimize process chemistry and integrate heat, mass and heat balances and do all the things that chemical engineers love to do. This is what our program tries to advance, to really accelerate the efficiency, to reduce the energy penalty of carbon capture, and really drive down the total system cost. That's what we're all about, and we have a large program that we're very proud of. And again, we love to share our knowledge and partner with countries to advance the state of the art. Part of our overall portfolio, once we move toward beyond laboratory testing and good ideas, is to actually scale up these promising technologies at larger and larger scales, lab scale to bench scale to small pilot scale. We have a facility in Alabama. It's operated by one of the large integrated utilities in the United States, Southern Company Services. The Department of Energy, with taxpayer funds, about 80% of the operations, and Southern Company matches our funds. And we've been doing a number of tests for well over 10 years to test at scale on real-world flue gas conditions, promising carbon capture technologies. We have over 100,000 hours of testing done at this facility, small slipstreams and pilot scale solvent tests at 0.5 megawatt electric type of scales. And we also partner with other countries that have similar pilot scale test facilities in a number of other nations, and you know, share and build out that more global data set that everybody benefits from. So that's a large part of what we do and will continue to do in our R&D program. We also have demonstrations. We'll see if our Congress gives us funds for an additional round of demonstrations of the latest and greatest carbon capture technology. But we are very proud of our first generation CCUS technologies that have been fully demonstrated at commercially relevant scale. You can see on this slide our Air Products facility. This was carbon capture from steam methane reformers using vacuum swim absorption technology. It's been operating wonderfully well since 2013. We've captured on the order of 7 million metric tons of CO2, and that's been transported into a pipeline for enhanced oil recovery in Texas. We also have another project that was a joint venture with NRG Energy and JX Nippon oil and gas exploration, a lot of strong Japanese participation. Mitsubishi Heavy Industry technology was demonstrated here, capture from a 240 megawatt flue gas stream. 3.5 million tons of CO2 already captured and used again for enhanced oil recovery, because that's the business model that made sense at the time. And so we're proud of that technology and that demonstration project as well. And then the third one that you see here is capture from an ethanol facility. This is actually the first project that used the new EPA regulation that I talked about, these Class 6 permits specifically designed for geologic CO2 storage. This project has been up and running since the middle of 2017 and stored several million tons of CO2. This uses very conventional chemical engineering technology, triethylene glycol, to dewater the gas that comes off of a biofuel plant. Then you just compress it, and it's stored in a Mount Simon sandstone formation right directly below the plant facility. So this is a wonderful example of bioenergy carbon capture and storage at industrial scale. And again, that's a project that we're very proud of. We also have initial engineering design and engineering scale testing. Again, you don't have to jump to commercial demonstrations to really advance progress on CCUS in a conversation in your country. Doing feed studies, front-end engineering design, initial engineering design can help prime the pump, if you will, and help accelerate deployment by commercial entities and private sector companies looking to progress projects. So there's a real catalytic role, or a great amount of leverage that government programs can do to try to accelerate and initialize some of these initial engineering designs and small scale testing to prove out promising concepts. We have many across some of the carbon intensive industries, steel and cement and ethanol, as you see on this slide. And again, hopefully our program will grow in that area in terms of additional front-end engineering design studies to help accelerate commercial project development in the United States, something you may want to consider working with your industry on as well as you look to progress CCS. As I mentioned earlier, a Biden administration interest is also in the broader set of carbon dioxide removal. This is broader than just CCS or CCUS. They're talking about, how do you sequester and avoid emissions by coastal blue carbon, sequestering CO2 into the oceans? How can you accelerate chemical weathering of rocks? Right, the two figures in the middle, direct air capture and biomass with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, those rely on the capture and storage components of CCS. But to the left and the right, whether you talk about afforestation and reforestation or soil carbon fixation of CO2, these are all in the technology approach of carbon dioxide removal. Again, something the Biden administration, the United States, are interested in and plan to show leadership on in a global scale, and would welcome working with you to advance this. We have an interagency working group that some of my colleagues are starting up. Our Congress is extremely interested in this technology space. We have a report that we will deliver to them probably around September, if all works out well, in terms of what additional legislation and funding and rules and financing mechanisms and policy tools could and should the federal government use to advance deployment of carbon dioxide removal projects, again, framed broadly, more broad than just CCUS, but certainly carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a large part of that. We also expect to stand up an interagency working group that will be durable and will continue forward after the report is produced, continue to progress this conversation at the federal level and work with state and subnational partners as well. So at high level, those are some of the policy tools. It's also very important to talk about, matching sources and sinks. Here's a map that comes from our National Petroleum Council's report that came out in 2019. They were a federal advisory committee to the Secretary of Energy. The Secretary asked them to do a study and provide their thoughts on what it would take to accelerate CCS deployment broadly in the United States. And as part of that, here's a figure from that report. It's a wonderful report, and you can see here we have good data of where all of our point sources are for CO2 emissions from the various sectors, whether they're power plants or industrial sector emitters. You can see here the lines are our existing infrastructure in the United States, because we've been working on enhanced oil recovery since 1972. We move on the order of 70 to 80 million tons of CO2 per annum, down primarily into the Permian Basin in Texas to do enhanced oil recovery. We have over 5,000 miles, over 7,000 kilometers of CO2 pipeline existing infrastructure already. And so one of the policy questions is, what can we do to leverage that existing infrastructure? How can we expand that to connect more of the dots that you see in the middle of our country from some of these high concentration or high purity CO2 sources, such as ethanol facilities, where the economics look very promising, but you need to find a way to connect and match source to sink. And so there's a lot of data that you need to get, and there's no time like the present to start working to get all of that data to really understand the situation and where the opportunities are for CCS projects in your country, and whether they're one-off projects matching sources to sinks, or whether you can think about a promising like a hubs and clusters concept where you can leverage geographically close carbon point sources and try to capture more of those and transport those to an individual storage site and optimize on your project economics overall. So the hubs and clusters concept, I assume my colleague from IEA talked about that, but that's certainly a large part of our policy conversation in the United States. In our storage program, in addition to carbon capture, we spend about $100 million per annum advancing carbon storage. We have a variety of partnerships across the United States, but we're looking at offshore and onshore, conventional and unconventional storage opportunities in saline formations or unconventional oil and gas reservoirs. We've done work on brine extraction tests. So how do you manage your brine in a geologic repository to make sure that you can control where your CO2 resides and solidifies long term. Lots of good R&D work in terms of advanced monitoring and measuring technologies as well, part of our storage program. And again, we're happy to share all of this information and collaborate with you. We really started our regional work back in 2003. We formed 7 regional partnerships. One of the other key takeaways is to really engage people at the local level. Through our regional partnerships, we engaged over 400 organizations through 43 of our states. We even included 4 of our Canadian provinces, our neighbors to the north in North America, and really did, really characterization phase of really understanding where the storage potential was for several years. Then we moved into small scale tests, injection tests to validate our data and our understanding of the subsurface. And then we moved into larger scale injection tests where we injected over 10 million tons of CO2 total over about a decade of time to really prove out our understanding of the subsurface. And so again, working with local communities, working with local organizations, extremely important to build that network of partnerships. I cannot stress that enough, how critical that is to advancing CCS projects. We're now moving into a successor phase, our regional deployment initiative. We have taken the United States and split it into 4 areas. And again, these partnerships are advancing project discussions in these regions, facilitating the sharing of data and analysis, really engaging the communities, right, with public engagement, sharing best practices of how you carry on that conversation and how you develop projects working with local communities. Again, extremely important, and this takes time. And so happy to work with you and share our lessons that we've learned in the United States in terms of public outreach and education on anything to deal with CCUS. So we put all these together, and really, you have to walk before you run. And we've done these small tests and then larger tests, and we're now moving into these large integrated tests to really, prove out sites and get them ready for large scale injection, at commercial relevant scales. And again, this is, takes a long time to do this and do this well, but by working together and sharing lessons learned, we can help you accelerate this progress. In addition to carbon storage in the ground, we're also looking at carbon utilization. We have over 55 active research projects in this area. These are relatively small awards on the order of $1 million US per award. But again, over 30 different research partners. The key thing with carbon utilization, again, one thing I want to stress is the absolute need to do life cycle analysis, do the math correctly to really understand what the carbon footprint is of this overall integrated system, and then use that to guide your discussions of what is right for your country in terms of what's the true emission reduction from that specific project and that life cycle analysis of that technology system at scale. Very, very important. And to help support that, we've done a lot of work on life cycle analysis. We have a strong team at our National Energy Technology Laboratory that really works on progressing life cycle analysis. Our colleagues in our treasury that do those tax credit incentives, 45Q that I talked about earlier, they are reaching out and will rely on our office in the Department of Energy to do the life cycle analysis, to do the technology due diligence and do the math that then they will base their tax policy tools on. Right, and so this requires good technical understanding. It requires technical analysis of the exact project and technologies and capture and all of that engineering needs to be looked at, and that needs to be analyzed correctly using a life cycle perspective. We have much expertise in this area, and again, not only are we supporting the other federal agencies, in this case our Internal Revenue Service for the 45Q tax policy, we also like talking to the global community about the absolute need for standards of how you do the math and you do the accounting correctly, such that we all can talk with a similar conversation in terms of what is the true carbon footprint for some of these systems. Extremely important as we all progress CCUS and all the carbon mitigation technologies together. So, at high level, we really take an integrated approach. We want to integrate both our carbon capture and our carbon storage R&D portfolios. We hope these come together in some integrated projects. We will do as much as we can from the federal government to accelerate and advance some technologies. If our Congress gives us funding for a next round of commercial demonstrations, we found that historically in the United States to be a very effective policy tool that can advance technologies like CCS that require commercial scale demonstration. But again, if this is going to scale, we really need to find ways to work with the private sector and policy tools that enable widespread commercial scale deployment, government, in our case, is not, in the best position to do broad commercial deployment. That's what the private sector does in the United States, and I assume in many countries around the world. And again, talking together of how we can find policy tools that leverage this government leadership and investment opportunity and allow the private sector to scale deployment. That is a conversation that I enjoy having and my colleagues like to have with as many people as we can every day of the week. And we look forward to those conversations with you as the Asia CCS Network stands up and we work together to advance CCS in the region. We have a number of knowledge sharing projects to try to get the word out and share all of this that I've hopefully given you a good overview of in the last little bit. This energy data exchange is really a workplace commons. It's all on the internet where you can get it, all the information that I talked about and more. We have a number of tools, risk assessment tools, simulation tools for where you would site pipelines to connect sources and sinks in the most cost-effective manner. We've got life cycle analysis tools that are publicly available. We have annual meetings across all of our R&D programs, carbon capture and storage and utilization, our international work, and those are open to the public. And so anytime that you want to have more in-depth conversation, there is much available from the United States. And again, we look forward to these conversations and working with you as you want to progress these opportunities. This is the Clean Air Task Force. I mentioned there's a group that was tracking commercial projects, the 36 or so. This is publicly available information on all the projects that are being advanced by the private sector in the United States now, and it's a good resource as well. I mean, you can see, again, geographically distributed all across our fine country. So a lot of excitement in the United States. Here's just an idea of some of our current DOE projects at scale and how these map with both our capture projects and our storage projects. We'd like to find a way to sort of dovetail those together because, again, at the end of the day, you need an integrated carbon capture, transport, and then utilization or storage project to make this all work. And again, when we, from our federal perspective, the more that we can try to get the capture and the storage connected together within our own portfolio, we find that to be an efficient way to work. And here, just graphically, you can see that we're doing an okay job at that with our current large-scale efforts. And finally, my last slide is just to end on, we thrive with international partnerships and leveraging all of our expertise in our program over the last 20 years in the United States. There's a number of mechanisms out there. Many of these mechanisms, and I think you're actively involved, hopefully, in many of these. We're very active in the International Energy Agency and all things carbon management related, specifically on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. That's a wonderful mechanism to share technology knowledge and engineering expertise and talk shop about where the technologies are and what are the opportunities to move forward and what are the things that we all need to collaborate on to advance the technologies and fill in our knowledge gaps. We drive the Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum that's been around for many years to, again, another mechanism to coordinate at a technical level across a number of countries. There's 26 countries that are involved in that mechanism right now. The United States, working with Saudi Arabia and Canada, is going to stand up an effort on carbon dioxide removal under the new Mission Innovation construct, and that will probably be launched this fall around the COP. So watch that space, and if you want to get involved in carbon dioxide removal technology advancement, that would be a good mechanism. We drive work under APEC. One of my colleagues at DOE chairs the expert group on clean fossil energy, and we're active in that space. We also engage in the United Nations. We engage in the Economic Commission for Europe. They have a Sustainable Energy Bureau that looks at CCUS as being an absolutely critical part of the tool set to meet our net zero ambitions and goals. And so we engage a lot of countries through the UN, through that mechanism. This ACT, Accelerating CCS Technologies Initiative, is a mechanism that we found very efficient to leverage our R&D with similar R&D in other countries. And so that may be a mechanism that you have interest in. And then obviously, while we're all here today, we very much look forward to working with all of you through the relatively new Asia CCUS Network. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. The U.S. Department of Energy is, again, strongly committed to supporting all of your efforts here. Hopefully, what I've given you, an overview of the landscape in the United States, and perhaps I'll end now and say thank you for your attention, and please engage in the dialogue here with the time remaining. We love to have questions and conversation. That's the best part of these webinars. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for your excellent and inspiring presentation on the U.S. development in terms of clean technology, particularly on the CCUS. And we are very impressed for I think, the very general overview and rich information on policy tool up to the project specific and how to ensure this CCUS can be commercialized in the US. I think without further ado, we have Director Jess will have overall impression on this uh, the USI development on CCUS. I'm sure that Director Jess will digest this and how this can be utilized, actually apply or in the Asia context. I saw already some question and Director Jess already respond to those, but let me invite Director Jess to have a comment on overall impression on the US development. Director Jess, the floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pumin, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to Mr. Daniel for the presentation. Well, I was asked to comment, but then looking at my notes now after the presentation, it's really more of a questions that I have and seeking clarification. Although looking also at the initial set of questions and answers I've seen, what I have on my notes are actually also may seem to be representing also the concerns or the issues or even the clarifications being asked by some of our participants today. So allow me to proceed, and maybe Mr. Pumin can help me whether I can just go through my list of comments and questions and then ask Mr. Daniels to respond, or we can do it one item after the other. So, but given the time for me, I think my own feeling is I may have to go through the long list that I have and ask Mr. Daniel later on to respond. But overall, for the presentation, I thank Mr. Daniel for the very informative set of information that you have presented today on CCUS. What is most appreciated on my part is that it's not that heavy on theoretical or theories. It's really you're presenting CCUS as a possible solution for us to be able to address and reduce emission. And that's most appreciated. And you pointed to us some of the installations that you have now in place, to include even the different information sources for us to be able to tap on and maybe also attend to some of additional concerns. What is also being appreciated at this point is that from your information, CCUS is still an evolving technology. There's still much to be desired, even for example, in the case of the Philippines. No? What may be economically justifiable for the US to implement may not be in the case of the Philippines, simply because of the level of I think economics, performance, and maybe the level of emission. So we also would like to indicate at this point, and I think your material also showed that CCUS is actually forming part of the strategy, the program, or even the tool towards energy transition. And in the case of the Philippines, that's actually one of the items we're trying to see. How much really can CCUS help us achieve the emission target we would like the energy sector to have? So here, allow me now to proceed. You've mentioned about the need and the continuing program US has on technology development, and even the identification or presentation on some of the tax incentives. The question is, what other legislations, regulations, or even standards are needed for us to be able to really promote CCUS?
Yeah,
I appreciate the additional information that CCUS is now being looked at or being explored in the industry sector. In our initial evaluation of CCUS, we're seeing actually that if we are to implement it, it may only be possible for us to do it if we look at the power generation sector. So we're happy to note that the energy intensive sector, industry sector can also be making CCUS. But would you have some response?
Sure. Well, I think at high level, the technologies are available today, right? We've been doing carbon capture from mixed, flue gas streams for decades. The technology is proven, and we've done quite a bit over the last 2 decades to drive down the cost. Our R&D will continue to drive down the cost and increase the performance of carbon capture. But the takeaway message is that the technology exists and can be done today, and there's a large number of projects that are operating all across the globe that prove that point. So it comes down to supporting regulations to make sure that you can do this in a legal sense in your country, right? With regulations that provide for surety of long-term storage in the subsurface. And that is a prerequisite, right? And I mentioned that in the United States context, our EPA finalized regulations in 2010 specific to carbon sequestration, carbon storage. So that is a requirement. The other thing then to allow this to scale is you need to find a business model that works and the economics of the project work in your country and on those specific projects at that site with that specific flue gas stream and matching source to sink, right? And so there's not a one size fits all in terms of that cost equation. But one thing that we've looked at is, from a strategy standpoint, you want to target, large sources versus lots of smaller sources because economy of scale. You would want to target high purity streams of CO2, right? So the more concentrated the CO2 is, the more efficient from an energy penalty and from an engineering perspective, and therefore the more cost effective it will be to capture CO2 from these high purity sources. And so there's a lot that goes on to, when you analyze where the opportunities are to do projects, to look for those projects that would optimize overall, project economics and work with the economic landscape in your country and the policy tools that you may have available. If you do that analysis and you do your due diligence and look at all that data, that can help inform how large or small of those policy tools need to be in a monetary sense to make projects successful and to make them financeable. I gave the data point in the United States that our original 45Q, our federal tax policy, our Congress originally set that policy tool at $10 and $20 per ton of CO2 avoided. And that was based on the way our markets looked a decade ago. And then shale gas revolution in the United States, energy got a little, cheaper in comparison than what it was. And those figure of merit were not sufficient to really drive broad deployment. And so our Congress said, okay, we're going to learn from that. And they readjusted that policy tool to the now current $35 and $50 per ton. The Biden administration and many people in Congress are looking to even accelerate that a little bit more because of some of the economic uncertainties that the global pandemic has caused for us and the urgency to address climate change as rapidly as we can. And certainly the Biden administration wants to lean forward into that. So again, a long-winded answer, but you really have to look at, from a business development, how do you make a project financeable? In addition to that, you need the regulations, durable regulations and policies where it will allow people to invest. And then obviously you need to do all of your homework and really understand the subsurface. And that usually, takes a lot of time. And so, we need to all start working on that as quickly as we can to allow widespread deployment to meet our climate targets.
Thank you for that. And I think that just confirms the initial impression that CCUS, while it's a proven technology and existing, it will need to have a country-specific program for us to really get the benefits from it. It's true, we need to have a specific business model, but one key item that you mentioned is really the cost of the technology will need to be really that affordable for any one country to adapt it. I think in one of 2 or 3 slides you've shown, but the question is actually, again, forming part of the business model, we will need to consider whether we will need to adopt a, how do you call, on-site carbon capture and storage, or if it's possible, do an integrated collection. Although initially, I think in one of the earlier study for Philippines, we will need to do also, we will need to have a pipeline to be able to collect and store CO2 in one identified area. But then I think it's the cost of transporting, collecting and transporting that carbon dioxide to a common space that will actually add substantially to the cost and maybe bring down the economic, how do you call
Yeah,
the attractiveness, of the project.
we need engineers to help optimize the technology, and we need economists to help optimize that overall solution of, from that system. How can we make that the most cost effective in terms of, dollar per ton of CO2 avoided? And again, it's a country specific conversation, and it depends on, your infrastructure and the point sources and where your storage resources are at. And there's tool sets that we have that can help you use your own data to analyze that and do that well and try to determine what's that optimal configuration, right? So those tool sets we've already developed and have optimized and improved and are on second, third, fourth, version. And we would love to share those with anybody that has interest. They're all out in the public domain. But again, it's really understanding how to optimize that overall cost that's very, very important.
Well, other than technology and other and cost-related concerns, there are also some initial concerns with respect to safety. Of course, there's still this NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's okay for you to collect, it's okay for you to store, but don't do it here. Okay, but what are the initial safeguards?
Well, there's lots of safe.
To be able to avoid CO2 leak and
there's lots of things. And again, our EPA regulations in terms of geologic storage, safety is of utmost, concern. And so all of those, and again, we're happy to share those, are done to promote safety, right? And so it's, again, that's a large part of regulation to make sure that that's done. The nice thing about CO2 is when you put it in the surface, the longer it stays there, the more secure it becomes, right? You inject it as a supercritical fluid, the longer it stays, it gets sorbed and trapped in the subsurface, in the pores, and eventually it forms, carbonates and turns into rock, essentially. So again, from a long-term surety, sometimes there's concern about is there an issue with this? And again, if you choose your site correctly, and all your regulations will drive you to ensure you choose your site correctly, and it's very well instrumented and very well characterized, then that should not be a problem in terms of the storage. And again, there's been projects out there, the Sleipner project operating in Norway for 20 years. Again, there's lots of data that we've done and that all of the global CCS community has done that says, we can prove that you can do this and operate this safely. I think in terms of the transport and storage, sometimes people don't like pipelines. In the United States, a lot of this pipeline infrastructure goes down to Texas, which is, one of the energy centers of our country. And so many people down there, they grew up with pipelines, and it's, not an issue from a public perception point of view. Again, we've had, CO2 enhanced oil recovery and thousands of miles of CO2 pipeline beginning in the early 1970s. There's never been a large, safety concern or issue with any of those. They operate just fine, year in, year out. And so I think safety is obviously something we need to talk about, but if we all do our work correctly to site CCS and build the integrated system with best practice, which are available today and are proven, then it should not be a large issue, and it should not stop, deployment. We just need to do this appropriately and safely, which we all can do, working together. There's lots of best practices and lessons learned in the United States. When I mentioned these regional partnerships, they did several versions of best practice manuals, best practice for going out and having these conversations with communities in terms of talking about safety, talking about infrastructure, talking about making sure that the community embraces and sees the value and the benefit for this project, right, that provides good jobs and economy to the local community and is essential to mitigate, global climate change, right? And having that conversation and allowing the local community to understand where CCUS fits in and supports getting to net zero. There's lots of work that we've done. There's lots of work that other countries and other companies have done in terms of that public outreach and engagement on safety as a specific topic, and then just in a broader sense in terms of the critical role that CCS has to play in our global objective.
Just following up on the different sites, what you've shown are actually all onshore sites for carbon capture and storage. Will there be much difference if a selected site is offshore?
Well,
Is
I
there
think from
now
a
any,
regulatory standpoint, there could be. In the United States, we have different federal agencies that have jurisdiction over onshore versus offshore lands, and so in subsurface, and so that's a live conversation now in terms of the regulations to permit offshore storage. We have much interest in offshore storage because you don't have that "not in my backyard" issue, right? People are more accepting if it's offshore. There's also interest to use existing infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure. Can you reuse that for carbon injection instead of hydrocarbon removal? So there's some interest there. There's a number of academic institutions in the United States, University of Texas, Bureau of Economic Geology, a number of folks are studying, CO2 storage opportunities and potential in the offshore context. We have a lot of bilateral work between us and Japan. We leverage work, the Tomokomai project, the demonstration project offshore in Japan. A lot of our folks in our national laboratories and academia are partnering and working with that project and collaborating with our tools and Japan's empirical data. And so there is a large global body of researchers and experts that have much good knowledge and data and expertise on offshore storage, and that body of knowledge is growing. And so for countries such as the Philippines, there is a wealth of information that you have available that you can engage, and we can work with you on to develop specific to your context and specific to the Philippines.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I think there's great value in being able to use CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. But then there's still the question, do we just store CO2? And what are the possible uses of CO2?
Yeah, and that ties into a question we got in the Q&A. And again, I think early in terms of early business models, and again going back to 1972, enhanced oil recovery is a business model that worked in our industry. Utilized. They don't use anthropogenic or man-made CO2. There's lots of naturally occurring CO2 that really drove enhanced oil recovery in the United States. From a climate change perspective, mitigation perspective, we would actually like to, eventually. Switch that to be anthropogenic sources, right, and capture CO2 with carbon capture, and then use that for an enhanced hydrocarbon recovery. That's a business model that's proven and works in the U.S. context. But again, you have to do the life cycle correctly to see how much net carbon you're actually reducing, right? You're certainly going to be lower than a baseline, but as our carbon budgets get smaller and smaller, and we need to be lower and lower carbon footprint, right? You're going to want to put in as much CO2 in the ground, right, and not produce as much CO2 as you did historically. That's absolutely essential, and the math and carbon accounting, are critical. And as business models shift to a fossil energy, production like we have conventionally now, to having financing and economics around mitigating carbon and avoiding carbon emission to the atmosphere, then I think those business models shift. In the United States, EOR is certainly where we're going to start. It's certainly not where we're going to end. And again, not all countries have that as an opportunity. Some may, but again, if that's an opportunity to get first of a kind technology out there, to learn by doing and drive down costs, getting from first of a kind project cost to nth of a kind project cost, there's a lot of value to be had from those types of projects in these early years as we all work to advance the technology and speed deployment.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, in terms of other questions that are coming up here, another one was on hydrogen production and CCS. And again, right now, 95% of global hydrogen is steam methane reforming, which is pretty amenable to adding CCS on it. And so CCS, again, if we think that hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, will be a critical part of a low carbon solution set, getting us to net zero targets mid-century in all of our countries, CCUS enabling hydrogen. That is really, from my analysis and the things that I've read and studied, one of the key drivers to scaling hydrogen infrastructure would be to do that through, conventional hydrogen production today with today's technologies with CCS that can accelerate that development of low carbon hydrogen and build that infrastructure that then some of the green hydrogen can tap into and leverage as we progress through this coming decade.
The question actually raised to me in a separate event is actually, why do carbon capture when you can really avoid production of CO2? And I was asked, how would CCUS compare with the use of nuclear for power generation, and even, yes, you mentioned earlier, hydrogen. Has there been
Yeah.
an initial
Oh, yeah, there has been. And again,
evaluation
I think it
comparison?
all boils down to we need all of these resources and all of these technologies available to all work in parallel to meet our combined goals, right? Our net zero targets and goals and addressing climate change mitigation and adaptation are going to require all technologies to work in parallel together. And so for countries where nuclear is an option, and in the United States, we get about 20% of our electricity generation from nuclear, but we don't expect to build many new nuclear plants just because, it's not cost competitive with a lot of the other, power generation technologies that we see today. In Japan, there's nuclear in their mix as well, and in lots of other countries. And so absolutely for, countries where nuclear energy makes sense, that is a large part of a wonderful, set of a portfolio of low carbon solutions. But not all countries have that opportunity, and not all societies, want to have nuclear energy in their country. And so I think it's going to be a healthy mix. There is no one size fits all answer. But CCUS in the power sector, right, applied on coal power plants or natural gas power plants, with well greater than 90% carbon capture, can get you to a very, very reduced carbon footprint, right? And they can also provide dispatchable power that can firm your overall electricity transmission system and help enable higher penetration of variable renewable power generation as well, right? You need firm power to help, fill the variability that some of the other electricity generation technologies have, and a fossil-based system with carbon capture, utilization, and storage can enable that to occur, and then enable higher penetration of some of those variable renewable generation technologies as well. So it's a complex, answer that requires a lot of analysis of each country's specific power grid to determine what's that cost-effective and societally optimal mix of technologies. From our analysis, CCUS certainly looks to be a part of that in many countries around the world.
Well, I think this is just going to be the last question for me. For government, especially when you say the program will generate jobs for the country, that becomes very interesting. Would you have top of mind information like how much job can a CCUS project actually generate?
Yeah, we do, and that's part of our, when we had the economic stimulus a number of years ago, 2008 or so, when the world economy crashed, there was a lot of government funding meant to stimulate jobs, right, and stimulate and jumpstart our economy. And there was a lot of analysis we did versus all of the various energy and low carbon technologies. And so we have that data that's available. That is of interest now, given the global pandemic that we're all in terms of the economic hit that many of all of our countries, took due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so right now, our Congress is looking at how can we accelerate, our economic recovery in the United States. What large jobs can the federal government help drive? A large way that's framed now in our current politics in the United States is in terms of infrastructure, building a robust, more sustainable, low carbon infrastructure that is more durable for some of the storms that we were talking about, earlier before the webinar, whether it's hurricanes or typhoons or fires. I mean, there's a lot that we need to do to increase the sustainability of our infrastructure. And that is a large part of the current conversation in the United States in terms of what type of good jobs could be done to make sure that we build toward a more sustainable, low carbon infrastructure and provide, jobs and goods and services and, economic benefit along the way. In terms of applying to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, there's talk about, jobs for CCS projects. There's also talk about if you need to build out a CO2 pipeline infrastructure, using steel and domestic workers to build that, right? I mean, good trades and welders and steel workers, and there's a lot of support from our trade unions for carbon capture, utilization, and storage because they see the potential for good paying union jobs to build the infrastructure required to help us meet our goals.
Okay, Mr. Pumin, if I may just answer to the question. The one question posted for me is there is a question on policy and timeline in the Philippines with respect to CCUS. Well, we still don't have the timeline or even the policy for CCUS. We're actually revisiting an earlier ADB study saying that natural gas-fired power plants together with our coal-fired power plants may provide some economy for us to have a CCUS program in place. But that will require actually putting up a 500-kilometer pipeline to transport and store CO2 in a to be depleted natural gas field. And that transport cost alone is going to cost us a lot, and it's not going to make CCUS attractive for us. But nevertheless, we continue to do the evaluation, trying to see all the possible ways and means to have any technology, not only to help us provide for the growing requirement for power, but at the same time to be able to reduce on the any level of emission coming from power generation and hopefully even in the industry sector. Well, thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so much, both Director Jess and Director Gerard. I think this rather than a question and answer, but rather it's a very nice conversation on, I think, how the U.S. overall progress in terms of policy tool, technologies that can be applied to Asia, that Director Jess have provide how this could be applicable and explore the way how the business model can be developed along the value chain of the CCUS, and also the topic of hydrogen issue also come up. I think let me say very nice comment, very nice conversation for both of you. But let me pick up some of the question. I think that those there is a time constraint, but let me try to read out some of the question. Apology if we cannot address all the question, but I hope that many question has been addressed during the conversation between Director Gerard and Director Jess already. Let me read out one of the question. I think they said that CCUS might be enabled to support the hydrogen production in the futures. Compared to nuclear energy, how is CCUS is more potential to accelerate hydrogen economy? I think one of the things, perhaps, Director Gerard, this perhaps may need to link with the how we utilize the, let's say, direct air capture to sustainable clean hydrocarbon. It's meant use the hydrogen combined with the capture CO2 to produce the fossil fuel. It could be also one of the things. If you can highlight all of these, I think will be appreciated. Yeah, thank you.
That's what. Yeah, no, that's one way. And I think back to our conversation we just had here, right? It's very country specific in terms of what makes the most economic sense to decarbonize, the energy sector in your own nation. And so, there are, for some, nuclear energy, and, production of hydrogen via nuclear energy. Our U.S. Congress actually gives my colleagues in our nuclear energy office in the U.S. Department of Energy funds to do hydrogen production from nuclear, technology R&D in parallel to, funds they give to the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Office in Department of Energy to do, hydrogen production from renewables. And that's in parallel to the work they give our office to look at, hydrogen production from fossil energy technologies with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so to support the hydrogen economy and hydrogen being part of our sustainable, future, there are many different engineering systems that can produce hydrogen. I think the key is how can you do that economically at scale in a sustainable manner with the lowest carbon footprint. And again, there's no one size fits all answer. It depends on, each specific country. I know in the United States, our shale gas revolution here has caused natural gas to be extremely inexpensive. And so with technology costs today, producing hydrogen with, from natural gas and carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, looks very, very economically attractive. If you look at other countries, such as the project between Australia and Japan, there's interest in using hydrocarbons and carbon capture, utilization, and storage to produce low carbon footprint hydrogen for the Japanese market. And so that's another interesting model that works with energy economics in Japan and Australia at the current moment. So a complex answer, but again, many opportunities to help support the hydrogen economy and its role in the broader effort to sustainable net zero targets.
Thank you, Director Gerard. I think your answer have respond to several of the question. So let me be selective to address a variety of the scope of question that we can cover. I think one of the issue that KK has, Koji Ms. San have asked is important life cycle that recent studies show that the life cycle assessment so that the blue hydrogen probably have emit more emission than, the green hydrogens, the green from the hydrogen produced from renewable solar and wind could have a high emission than the blue hydrogen. In this case, you get any update on this? Because I'm not familiar that this it's very new thing to me, but I used to review on this that green hydrogen is the best for anything. But it seems this study showing that green hydrogen emit less emission than the the blue hydrogen emit less than the green hydrogen. Any comment on this, Gerard?
Yeah, I think this question, and thank you for it, it highlights the importance of doing the math correctly and consistently. And again, taking a life cycle, analysis or life cycle assessment approach is critical for all of us in a very open and transparent manner to understand, for a specific project or for a specific load of decarbonized hydrogen or low carbon footprint hydrogen, what the math shows in terms of what is the actual carbon footprint when you draw the box correctly around the system from an overall life cycle perspective. And you can do that both from a technology perspective to say what's the life cycle on a CO2 basis. You also need to do that and say what's the overall life cycle on an economic basis. And again, a lot of policies should look at that life cycle to help inform how they can be optimized to help meet our goals and to be an efficient policy tool. And so I mentioned in the United States context, our Department of Energy office is doing the life cycle analysis for our tax credits for Treasury. You could apply life cycle analysis for, a fungible hydrogen market across countries, right? The countries could trade a shipment of hydrogen and price it according to its carbon footprint. But you need to have an agreed upon standardized life cycle assessment to have agreed upon math to say what exactly is the carbon footprint of that shipment of hydrogen. This is extremely important for governments to work together to try to standardize that. So it's not, apples and oranges and pickup trucks and gorillas and bananas, but it's more, on an even playing field, and you can compare one number from one country with one number from another in terms of, what that carbon footprint is. And so standardizing that life cycle assessment is extremely important. It's something that governments need to work on with the financial community, so the financial community can understand this and then make their investment decisions based on an understanding of what the carbon footprint math is. It's extremely important for governments to coordinate and collaborate such that there's a uniform standard across many countries, so that if you think about a carbon market standing up, that's critical. This is being done now under the UNFCCC, the COP, the Paris Accord conversation. There's an issue called Article 6, and there's a whole group of people under that construct that are dealing with this very topic of how do you make sure that that carbon market and that life cycle carbon accounting are done correctly and transparently and uniformly, such that these markets can operate across country borders. It's extremely of interest to private companies that are wanting to either produce carbon offsets through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or afforestation, or any of these carbon dioxide removal technologies, direct air capture, for example. They want to sell those credits. but you need to have a transparent marketplace, and there's a strong role for governments to make that happen. So again, I very much appreciate Koji-san's question. Life cycle assessment is extremely important, and again, there's a role for governments to show leadership in that area. It's being worked under the UNFCCC, but there's much more work to be done. And private sector and the financial community is very interested in doing, in seeing this before any of these, deals are really going to materialize at scale, because we all need to be on the same page, understanding the true math.
Gerard, thank you so much. By the way, there are so many questions actually remaining that I think cannot be addressed just for the single virtual workshop because of time constraint. But let me address one more question before we head to the wrap up, because it's I think we should not left this apology that for all participants we may extend around 5 or 10 minutes if any delay. Please apologies for this, because so many questions that sorry also that posed to Gerard for this. Perhaps this is very interesting. First of all, although the presentation already highlight about the legal framework that in the United States is from a federal framework to support the overall deployment of CCUS in terms of tax credit and others. But how the national and state local regulatory policies that could harmonize the support of CCUS implementation, how the federal government that provide overall tax credits, as you said, the 45Q tax codes, that is very powerful tax codes to incentivize the investment. But at the same time, how the state, local level regulatory can be harmonized and further support this implementation? Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's absolutely essential, right? To determine how can you optimize and let, national and subnational, or in the United States context, federal and state and local government policy tools work together and harmonize, to use your word, to help advance all of these types of sustainable energy technologies, right? And so, sometimes they're additive, right? So you can add this federal 45Q tax policy tool to a low carbon fuel standard in California. And many companies are looking to produce projects and develop projects that can take advantage of both of those policy tools, the national and the subnational, together. They're additive and they help the project economics be financeable, right? There's also, other mechanisms that are available, whether it's, promising tax treatment at a local level, tax breaks for a project, whether it is, some issues in terms of risk sharing and opportunities there. If it's a project in the power sector, maybe a local municipality or a subnational, government says, we will guarantee to purchase your low carbon electricity from your project. And if they have that purchase guarantee, right, that power purchase agreement, then it's easier for the project developer to go to a bank and get financing if he has a guaranteed buyer for his electricity or her electricity. And so there's many mechanisms, but I think to the point and to the question, it's absolutely essential for all of these levels to work together to make sure that those policy tools work together and are consistent with each other and not at odds with each other. That's very important. And again, we have many examples in the United States we're happy to share.
Thank you so much, Gerard. I think for sharing this insightful, practical example in the United States. I think we hope such kind of seminar can be continuous more, but because of time constraint, let me apologize that we cannot address to all the questions. But hopefully we will do more this kind of workshop that that is very much interested for Asia stakeholder. I think before we are proceeding to the conclusion and wrap up, let me thank Director Gerard and Director Jess for a very nice conversation on this issue of the CCUS from the policy point of view and to the practical application of CCUS from the United States and how this can be practical in the Asia context in the futures. With this, let me once again thank both of you for this insightful presentation and comment. Let me head to the conclusion of today's webinar. Let me invite Mr. Sikuru Kimura Sensei, the special advisor to the president of ERIA on the energy affair for the wrap up and as well as the closing remark of today's virtual conference. Kimura Sensei, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Pumin, and a very good morning, all of you, thank you very much, all of you, for your participation to the second ASEAN Knowledge Sharing Conference. And also, thank you very much, Mr. Daniels, for your kind participation as the presenters to introduce the US CCUS program and activities. And your presentation is really informative and comprehensive. And also, Jess, thank you very much for your participation as the commentator to represent the ASEAN regions. And I'm very much interested in this, your talking and dialogue between you and Mr. Gerard is very, very interesting dialogues.
Okay.
I'd like to wrap up the today's conference as my closing remarks. So Mr. Daniels is mentioned about a lot of things to us, and all are very, very useful and effective for us. But I'm very impressed by the slide 2. It is essential of the promotion of the CCUS. Firstly, national leader like a president set up the goal, 100% carbon-free power sectors. And after that, Secretary of DOE is touch upon the CCS technologies, including the hydrogen and the DAC. And technology is very important. And thirdly, Secretary of the Treasury is mentioned about the tax incentive for the CCUS business, so-called the 45Q tax credit. So that leadership set up the goal, and detailed energy expert is talk about promote the technologies, and expert of the financial leaders is support CCUS business in terms of the tax incentives. So that maybe this is a very good reference for ASEAN, for the Asian region, in order to promote the CCUS. Then also Mr. Daniel Gerard is mentioned about the CCUS is important and enabling energy technology to achieve the net zero emission in the United States. I fully agree, and CCUS is a very, very one piece of the important energy technologies. And Mr. Gerard also mentioned about the CDR, carbon dioxide removables. It is very advanced technologies. It consists of the BECC, bioenergy CCS, and the DAC, direct air capturing. So in order to promote the CDR, appropriate act like regulation, and also the interagency coordination is very important. So that this is very good feedback for us. And also he mentioned about the introduce us the environmental regulation. This is fully push the promotion of CO2 storage, because the no regulation is private sectors cannot do anything. So that regulation is very, very important policies, and also the pushing the CO2 EOR and the long-term CO2 storage. It's very important, but regulation should be appropriate. And also, Gerard is a bit mentioned about the RCSPs, Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership. this is some region is engaging the carbon CCS. So this idea is a very, very good example for the ASEAN, because the ASEAN and Asia, because the in this Asia region, we really need the CO2 value chain, capturing, transport, and storaging. So that a pipeline is also, CO2 pipeline is one of the idea in terms of the transportation. And Mr. Gerard is today's also lot of things to touch upon is demonstration project in the United States, and the technology support, and storage mapping, and the utilization, CO2 utilization with LCA studies. So all today's lectures by the provided by the Mr. Gerard is kind of the textbook for the network, so that we can get a lot of implication from this textbook. And as you know, the network, we have ASEAN, we have the vision, and including the target to by the 2025 and the target to the 2030. So that network is in order to achieve the this target by 2025 and 2030, network would like to make effort to implement a promotion of the CCUS in Asia region, so that I very much appreciate the USDOE's continuous support to the network. And Jess, thank you very much for your discussion between the Gerard and you. And you raised the very, very important point. First one is regulations. We network and Asia region countries, we recognize the importance of the regulation, but we don't know what kind of regulation will be appropriate. So that US experience is a very, very good reference for us in order to set up the regulations. And also the Mr. Gerard mentioned one size not fit all.
Yeah.
So that situation is different by country. So that I think that, and also the economic scale is a difference. So that the country-specific model of the CCUS is very important, and this concept is should be applied to the in Asia region. So that we never do copy of the CCUS of the US to the Asia region. So we have the we will have the specific condition. US experience is a very good reference, but we need to specialize to the Asian conditions. And also safety. I fully agree. Safety is very important, and like public acceptance. So just say the okay, CO2 storage is okay, but not my backyard, something like. So that the public acceptance is very important, and we are very much appreciate the touch upon the US experience. And the offshore storage, the Asia region is separated by sea, so that deep sea is one of the options for the storage. And also just raise the one very important point is comparison. It's low zero emission energy or CCUS, like hydrogen and nuclear or CCUS. Maybe we need to make the cost benefit analysis, and also the we seek for the best portfolio or best energy mix. So that CCUS is one of the technologies, and Asia region need to seek for the best mix of the energy technology to achieve the reduction or zero emissions. And also creating a job is very important. And Mr. Gerard said in the CCUS need to construct a lot of the infrastructures and a lot of the operation site. So that he said, my understanding is CCUS is will create the some significant job in Asia and ASEAN regions. So that is my wrap up, and thank you again, Mr. Gerard, for your excellent presentations, and also the thank you, Jess, for your attractive conversation between the panelists, commentator, and the presenters. Thank you very much. And I return the microphone to the Pumi.
Thank you so much, Kimra Sensei, for very nice, insightful closing remark. And also thank for all speakers, Director Gerard Daniel, Director Jess, and also Harasan for the opening remark for today. And we have heard very nice knowledge sharing and also comment on the CCUS. And also a big thank to all advisory group member and supporting member, and all participants who spend your valuable time to attend this conference. The conference is very successful, and we are very much grateful for your participation and continued support to such kind of conference. From time to time, please visit the Asia CCUS Network website at www.asiaccusnetwork-area.org. With this, let me announce that the conference is officially closed, and we wish you a very good morning and a very good night at the United States. Once again, thank you so much, and hope to see you again for such similar event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pumin. Thank you very much, Gerard.
Okay.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you. Very nice. We have more than 150 participants today for this conference. I'm very excited.
Thank you for the opportunity. These are conversations we love to have. We very much look forward to supporting the Asia CCUS network any way that USDOE can be helpful. And again, thank you for the listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Jess. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.